There's a moment in every man's life when the world slows, not because he's chosen to reflect, but because life forces him to. The body stiffens. The noise of ambition fades. The urgency to impress weakens. And what's left is the one thing he's always tried to outrun: himself. A man can live decades avoiding his inner world. He can master the roles: the provider, the husband, the leader. He can build structures, raise children, earn respect. But none of those achievements offer peace when he's sitting alone in a quiet room, wondering why his heart still feels unfinished. There's a reason most men don't understand what they're truly feeling. Emotional clarity was never given to them. It wasn't taught. It wasn't valued. In its place, they were offered control, distraction, or silence. If you grew up being told that tears are weakness, that desire must be hidden, that anger is strength and vulnerability is a threat, then what emotional tools were you ever supposed to develop? It's not that men are emotionally unavailable. It's that their emotional map was burned long before they knew how to read it. What remains is instinct and avoidance, a survival tactic, one that works until it doesn't. And for many, that breaking point arrives later in life, when everything once used to validate identity begins to lose meaning. The career slows. The children leave. The phone grows quiet. Women no longer look at you the same way. You're not needed in the same way. And without those functions, you're left wondering if you've ever actually known yourself outside of being useful. The crisis. This is the crisis most men face in silence. Not because they're incapable of introspection, but because no one ever gave them permission to investigate their own hearts. You can't connect deeply with others until you learn how to connect deeply with yourself. But connection requires emotional literacy, and most men, especially as they age, have been starved of that language. So they substitute it with logic, with control, with routine. It gives them structure, but not fulfillment. By the time a man reaches old age, his emotional backlog is often decades deep. Unprocessed grief, silent resentment, desire buried under discipline. Pain masked as pride. He doesn't even realize how much he's still carrying, because he's learned to keep moving. Slowing down would mean confronting things that no one trained him to face. But growth demands that confrontation. Most old men aren't suffering because of what's happened to them. They're suffering because of what they never allowed themselves to feel. The divorce, the betrayal, the moments they felt like a failure and said nothing. The times they wanted to be held, understood, forgiven, but chose silence instead. They told themselves it was strength. It was survival. It was necessary. And maybe it was, but now it's a prison. Because if you spend your whole life prioritizing logic over feeling, you'll end up with answers but no peace. Plans but no intimacy. Achievements but no emotional legacy. The emotional wounds you avoid do not disappear with time. They settle deeper. They harden. And eventually, they become the lens through which you see everything, especially love. This is why so many older men speak of regret, not just in romantic relationships, but in how disconnected they feel from the people closest to them. Children who don't call. Partners who feel like strangers. A loneliness that no amount of success ever silenced. But it's not too late. Age doesn't prevent transformation. What prevents it is denial. The moment you begin to examine the emotional architecture of your life, not through shame, but through honest reflection, you begin to shift. You see how much of your personality is actually unresolved pain. You begin to question who taught you that love must be earned, or that anger is the only acceptable form of emotion. And most importantly, you begin to understand that your emotional patterns weren't chosen. They were inherited, modeled, imprinted. But that doesn't mean they have to be permanent. Old men can change, not through performance or promises, but through deeper awareness, through the willingness to look inward without justification, through the courage to admit, even at the final chapters of life, that you still have more to learn about love, connection, and yourself. The tragedy is not aging. The tragedy is aging without ever knowing who you truly are beneath the layers you've built for protection. You're not too old to feel. You're not too far gone to reach someone, especially yourself. Emotional development. The process begins when you stop trying to make sense of your emotions and start letting them teach you something. They're not threats to your masculinity. They are the missing parts of your humanity. And the older you get, the more urgent it becomes to reclaim them. Not because you're weak, but because you finally lived long enough to know what actually matters. By the time most men reach the later decades of life, they become experts in appearing composed. On the outside, they move with certainty. Their voice carries the weight of experience. Their opinions are formed not by theory, but by years of trial and error. But beneath that surface lies something else entirely. The quiet ache of missed emotional development. The assumption is that time brings wisdom. But age alone doesn't refine character. What refines a man is his willingness to investigate the truths he once avoided. And no truth cuts deeper than this. A life without emotional self-awareness will eventually feel hollow, no matter how full it once looked. A man can raise a family, lead teams, build a reputation that spans decades, yet still find himself estranged from the very people who once depended on him. He may have offered them everything he could measure, time, money, advice, yet withheld the one thing he never understood how to give, himself. You can only offer presence if you've learned to sit with your own. But many men treat presence like a currency, something to exchange for loyalty or gratitude, not realizing that presence without emotional openness is just another mask. It's a performance dressed up as strength. Men often wonder why their partners drift, why their children grow cold, why their relationships lose intimacy. They assume it's distance or personality, or the inevitable erosion of connection. Rarely do they look inward to ask how long they've been emotionally absent while physically present. The human heart doesn't respond to provision alone. It responds to resonance. And resonance comes from understanding, not just intellectual understanding, but emotional contact. It's the capacity to notice someone's tone and hear what isn't being said. It's the discipline of pausing long enough to sense when someone is afraid, even if their words are confident. These are not feminine traits. They are human ones. But if a man has lived decades ignoring his own emotional signals, how can he expect to read anyone else's? The cost of emotional neglect isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's subtle. A partner who stops opening up. A son who keeps conversations short. A daughter who shares more with her friends than with her father. A slow, steady erosion of closeness that no one ever names out loud. Eventually, men begin to feel it, that something is off, that despite being respected, they aren't truly known. Despite being present, they aren't deeply remembered. And no matter how hard they try to fix it through words or gestures, it doesn't land, because what was missing was never on the surface. Emotional self-mastery isn't about control. It's not about managing outbursts or suppressing discomfort. It's about awareness, noticing patterns, recognizing when you're speaking from fear instead of clarity, observing how your defenses form before anyone even raises their voice. It's the realization that you've been reacting to the world through a lens built decades ago, and unless that lens is examined, it governs everything from how you handle conflict to how you express affection. Many men, especially as they grow older, start to feel misunderstood. They believe they're giving their best, but often what they're offering is outdated. It's shaped by a time when emotional distance was considered noble, when Stoicism meant silence, when love was measured in responsibility, not presence. They think they're doing what they were taught to do, and they are. The problem is that what they were taught was incomplete. To evolve, you don't need to abandon your values. You need to refine them. Strength isn't diminished by emotional capacity. It's deepened by it. Vulnerability doesn't make a man fragile. It allows him to connect in ways that are actually remembered. The men who age with dignity are not the ones who refuse to change. They are the ones who continuously shed the parts of themselves that were built in fear. They recognize when protection has turned into isolation, when pride has mutated into defensiveness, when the fear of irrelevance has caused them to cling to authority rather than offer guidance. There is a kind of freedom that only comes with age, the freedom to stop performing, to no longer posture, to stop chasing validation from people who never understood your depth in the first place. But that freedom only becomes meaningful when it's used to build something real, not another business, not another image, but a self that no longer hides behind roles. Many old men live with secrets, not dramatic ones, emotional ones, the kind they've never voiced out loud, the times they were scared, the decisions they regret, the nights they stayed awake wondering if they were truly loved or just tolerated. They carry these memories like unfinished chapters. And over time, those unspoken truths become shadows that follow them into retirement, into new relationships, even into their solitude. But shadows only grow in silence. They lose their power the moment they're named. And that act of naming what you've hidden is where emotional mastery begins. Emotional mastery. It doesn't require years of therapy or some perfect language. It starts with a willingness to sit with discomfort, to ask questions no one else will ask, to look in the mirror without turning away too quickly. What am I avoiding? Who do I still blame? What part of myself have I disowned? You don't answer these all at once, but you begin. And the more you begin, the more life opens, the more relationships soften, the more connection finds you. Not because you chased it, but because you create a space for it to exist. Old age gives you time. What you do with that time determines whether you grow or decay. Most men shrink inward. They double down on control. They mask curiosity with cynicism. They use experience as a shield instead of an invitation. But the few, the rare few, use the years not to retreat but to deepen. They become still, observant, willing to see the world and themselves as they are, not as they wish to appear. And from that stillness, something shifts. Conversations change. Relationships deepen. And the man who once felt out of place in his own skin finally starts to feel at home. Conversations change. Not because he perfected himself, but because he finally accepted that the work of being a man doesn't end. It just changes shape. It's easy to dismiss change once the body slows. You tell yourself you've already lived the life you were given. You justify the silence in your relationships as the natural outcome of age. You assume the emotional distance you feel is simply how things go. But beneath all of that lies a truth most men refuse to confront. It isn't too late. It never was. It's just harder now because the stakes feel heavier. You've made decisions that can't be reversed. There are conversations that will never be had. People have walked away. Others have stayed but grown quiet. And there are moments that, no matter how much you wish it, will never return. But regret is not proof that you failed. Regret is proof that you started to see clearly. The clarity that comes with aging can be brutal. It strips away pretense. It shows you where you misjudged people, where you clung to control when you should have listened, where you chose to be right instead of being kind. But it also gives you a strange advantage. The awareness that you no longer need to prove anything. You don't need to win anymore. You don't need to posture. You don't need to impress. You're free to tell the truth. You're free to admit what you never could when you were younger. That you were scared. That you were unsure. That you didn't always know what you were doing. That your strength was often just fear in disguise. There's a strange kind of wisdom that only shows up when your time feels more finite. It's the kind of wisdom that forces you to stop looking outward for resolution. You stop blaming your upbringing. You stop blaming the world. You stop waiting for someone to rescue you from your own emotional detachment. And you begin, slowly, to reclaim responsibility, not for what happened, but for what you do with what remains. Resolution. The hardest part is accepting that some of the pain you carry wasn't caused by others. It was shaped by your reactions, your inability to forgive, your refusal to feel, your instinct to push people away before they had the chance to disappoint you. The distance you created to protect yourself eventually became the barrier that kept you from everything you once said you wanted. Connection, intimacy, peace, purpose. And now, as life starts to quiet down, you feel it. That question you buried under years of distraction. Who have I really been underneath all the roles? If you're honest, you'll notice something uncomfortable. That you often use logic to escape emotion. That you valued efficiency over empathy. That you've held people to standards you never applied to yourself. And that you've misunderstood love as something that had to be earned rather than something you could receive just by being present. There's no quick fix for that realization. But there's a path forward. A path forward. You begin by doing what you avoided. You speak the words you withheld. You listen instead of reacting. You stop rehearsing your identity and let yourself become something more honest. A man who can hold contradiction without collapsing. Who can remember the ways he's failed without letting them define him. Who can love without control and grieve without shame. You make amends, not always with words, not always with others, but with yourself. You forgive the version of you that didn't know any better. You stop expecting people to understand what you never gave yourself time to explain. You stop asking others to give you what you refuse to give to yourself. And then something changes. It won't be loud. It won't come with applause. But one day, you'll notice that you don't feel as bitter, that your anger doesn't rise as quickly, that you feel something softer in your chest when someone tells you they love you. And for the first time, you believe it. You'll start to see people differently. Your children, your partners, even the strangers in passing. You'll notice that everyone is carrying something. Everyone is trying to figure out how to live with what they weren't taught. And in seeing that, your own burden feels less isolating. Legacy. Eventually, you'll realize that legacy isn't built through dominance or control. It's built through presence. Through the people who feel safer because you listened. Through the moments you chose to stay when everything in you wanted to leave. Through the honesty you shared when it would have been easier to hide behind old patterns. You may never get the recognition. There might not be a moment where someone thanks you for becoming a better man. But you will feel it. You'll feel it in the way the silence changes. It will no longer be filled with judgment or longing. It will carry weight, but not heaviness. Depth, but not regret. It will feel like peace. The world doesn't expect old men to change. That's why it matters so much when they do. When they step out of the caricature that culture has handed them. When they stop trying to be the stoic, detached father figure and start being someone human. Someone who can feel sorrow without being lost in it. Someone who can offer affection without needing permission. Someone who is no longer afraid to be seen. Not for what he's done, but for who he is. It takes a lifetime to become this kind of man. Most never reach it. They die wrapped in armor they thought they needed. But a few, the rare few, walk the final stretch of their life lighter. Not because they had fewer scars, but because they finally stopped pretending they didn't. And if you're still here, listening, breathing, thinking, then you're one of the few who can make that turn. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to undo the past. You just have to begin telling the truth. First to yourself. Then, eventually, to the people who matter. Outro. Everything you've avoided still lives inside you. But so does everything you're capable of becoming. You were never too old. You were just waiting for permission. But the only person who can give it is you. So take it. Begin again. Not as a man you were taught to be, but as the man you were always meant to become. If this message found its way into your chest, if something in you stirred, even for a moment, don't let that moment pass. There are men all over the world walking through life on autopilot, carrying invisible weight, waiting for a sign that it's okay to look within. Be the one who listens. Be the one who transforms. And if this journey spoke to you, stay close. Subscribe to this channel. Not for entertainment, not for noise, but because here we speak the language of truth, depth, and emotional awakening. For men who are ready to grow, for women who want to understand them, and for anyone who believes that it's never too late to come home to yourself. Click the bell. Stay with us. Your evolution has already begun.